And what a magnificent sight, the familiar skyline of New York. We are now going up the Hudson River. We have only recently passed the Governor's Island, where the U.S. Army barracks gave the Constitution a national salute of 21 guns. The Constitution is proceeding magically up the Hudson River.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Great American Story. This is, well, it's one of the great streaming shows you're going to find online anywhere. We produce it out of our Fox studios in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm Ron Hoon. John Netzel joins. John is the creator and the idea man behind The Great American Story. John, I don't know about you, but any story that goes back as far enough to cover swashbuckling pirates sailing out, trying to capture loot on American ships. We're talking more than 200 years ago, creating all kinds of heartburn for a brand new government back in Washington, trying to figure out what is going on off the coast of North Africa. And they were kidnapping our merchants. They were, they were stealing our things. And at some point, it was finally decided that the United States Navy, which didn't exist at that point, needed to come into existence. And that will lead us to the great story of the USS Constitution, which we're going to be discussing today.
Yeah, it really is the beginning of the U.S. Navy. Yeah. This is where it all started. This was George Washington in 1794, went to Congress and said we need a navy for the reasons that you brought up, as well as to display that we were a sovereign nation. That was part of the reason behind it. Well, a burgeoning nation that had limited resources, and
mostly filled with farmers.
For sure.
Back in those days, people are like, "What? A navy? That's
right.
That's Britain."
Yeah.
Right?
And by way of comparison, they had the largest navy in the world.
Yeah.
And as we'll see in the story, the War of 1812 was just around the corner, which is where we would certainly need our Navy. Yeah. But this is a neat episode because we're going to talk about the last remaining ship that was built in that time. It is still commissioned today. It's actually the oldest ship still in commission afloat. Yes. Because that's an important distinction in the world.
Now, you grew up with a real fascination for life on the sea, I guess you could say. Right?
Well, I'm from New England, so this hits home to me. The USS Constitution is moored, it's harbored in outside of Boston in Charleston Navy Yard, and there's something special about that.
Did you ever go see it as a kid?
Not as a Well, I take that back. It's possible I think my parents did take me as a kid. I think there's a picture of me and my brother in front of the USS Constitution. I don't remember it as a kid, but my son and I went a few years back, and it's living history.
Right.
You're aboard a ship that was built 228 years ago, commissioned by the Congress under George Washington. Yeah. And it still has some of its original wood that it was built out of. Some of the original construction still exists. Now, it's a small percentage, but it still does exist on that ship.
I mean, I guess the wood that they used to build this incredible ship and the victories that she had at sea, we are going to be talking about today because, believe me, those were some much needed boosts in the arm of the American people.
Yes.
Just the idea that you could take on the greatest navy the world had ever seen, the British Navy, was maybe almost on the borderline of preposterous. But yeah, so I mean, it starts with a frustrated president and a growingly frustrated Congress who says, okay, we got to do something. I did a little research here, John. Yeah. When the pirates over there outside of Tripoli took some of our men as hostage, about 20 men, they demanded $59,000 in payment for them to be released. That was in 1794. And that would have been worth $1 million $660,000 today. Well, this fledgling little government of ours, about 10 years old, sure didn't have that kind of money.
Yep.
But at least they were wise enough to say, we have to build an army, and right at that point we have to build a navy, and we got to equip them with the kinds of ships that can literally compete with the best ships in the world. And that's exactly what they did. Old Ironsides had just the sides of this ship were almost 2 feet thick.
Yes, 300 feet long.
Yep, length of a football
Length
field.
of a football field.
Right.
I have some details here as far as tonnage and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yes, yeah.
2,200 tons displacement. It's a massive ship.
Right.
68 tons of cordage.
Okay.
So that amounts to about 75 miles of cordage.
Wow.
44 sails. An acre of canvas. I just love
that's what we call serious show prep,
right
there, Johnny. Here's the of all those facts and figures, the one that kind of flabbergasted me the most. Her main mast was 220 feet tall. Now that would be the equivalent of about a 20-story office building. Which 20-story office buildings did not exist in the 1700s. I mean, when you walked up to this thing, it was a sight that you would never forget.
It's true.
Yeah.
And I think that's what, Washington wanted to build. Obviously, they had limited funds. They built 6, we should say. They built 6 frigates.
Right.
The USS Constitution being one of them. But the USS Constitution was one of the more heavily armed. It was a 44 gun. They had 4 44 guns, and I think the other ones were 36 guns.
By the way, the one we're talking about today and the one that still exists, and you can go walk right onto it there in the harbor in Boston, is the Constitution.
That's right.
Nicknamed Old Ironsides.
Yep.
But they actually had so much deference for Washington as president, they said, we'll give you the ships, and you can name them.
Yeah.
And I love that one of the first names he went with was the president.
Yes. Well, did you know that originally they were named Ship A, B, C, D, E, F?
You're right.
And then Washington changed them. But you're right.
The president, the Congress, the Constitution, the Constellation, the Chesapeake, and the United States.
And so all of those ships, all of those frigates, only the Constitution remains.
Right.
The rest of them were either destroyed, they were either chopped up because they just disrepair, whatever.
Can you believe that?
But
for goodness sakes.
The Constitution really found a place in America's heart, as we'll see in the next few minutes.
Well, and it's also to me really interesting that so they get these ships, in their process of committing to build them, and then all of a sudden they sign a treaty.
That's right.
And they pay, which at that time was really a staggering sum with Algiers, $990,000.
Yeah.
Almost $1 million, which who knows how many umpteen million that would be today. But once they paid the bills, and I'm not saying they were all tightwads, but I think some of them were, John.
Yes.
And they paid this bill. They're
sure.
like, look, we're already out of almost close to $1 million, which we probably don't even have. And so then there was a real debate going on in Congress as to whether to just shut down that project building these ships for the U.S. Navy. And just barely, I understand it was a close vote, they decided, well, okay, we'll go ahead.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
Thank goodness, because as you said, we
needed them.
Within not that many years, the War of 1812, and honestly, I think if Old Ironsides didn't exist, I'm not saying the outcome of the war would have been that we would have lost, but it was not America's greatest days during the War of 1812. But this ship, in a battle that we're going to discuss now, when it finally rolled out to sea, it was took more than the measure of whatever the British Navy had on its side.
That's true. I think, let me step one step back.
Yeah.
The building of these ships was a feat in and of itself.
Okay.
They used southern live oak. It was the country had this area of the country, the southern part of the country, down south of Virginia, down into Georgia, was blessed with this area that that produced live oak, and live oak was rot resistant. It was extremely tough. It was what they used for ship making because of its qualities.
Yeah.
It was what they had to go through to get that wood out of what was basically swamps.
Yeah, St. Simon's Island.
St. Simon's Island. Right. And great book on this by Ian Toll, Six Frigates. He discusses all of this. There is a great part in here about just how they pulled this wood out of there. The white oak, he says, it was said to have the lifespan 5 times of that of white oak. But the shipbuilders rolled their eyes every time a new shipment of this came in, because it was so hard that if a nail was driven into it, it was nearly impossible to extract, and axes bounced off it and saws moved back and forth across it again and again, making little or no discernible progress.
Wow.
Not only that, they had to get the biggest pieces of live oak, which were the hardest to pull out of these swamps. Wow. They had teams of oxen pulling these giant timbers.
Right. They had 2,000 logs they ultimately had to cut down. It's incredible.
Crews were dying of malaria.
Yes.
The oxen were dying. It was a miserable process.
Right.
And it just kind of goes to like, wow, you look at that ship and go, wow, what it took to build that thing is amazing.
And you can imagine that if you couldn't use an axe to even chop into it, that when the stories were finally told, and this is going to be coming up after the break about this first great battle that just swelled American pride in this victory, and as people were looking on and they were seeing it appeared to them that the cannonballs were bouncing right off.
Yeah.
With the wood that was that hard and nearly 2 feet thick on both sides of that ship. Yeah. So, we are going to talk about that, because eventually those 6 ships got built. The Constitution, kind of funny, when it was time for it to roll out, it was so heavy that it basically kind of floated down just a little bit and then was stuck. And here you had the president of the United States, John Adams, looking on, and they had to kind of figure out, well, look, we've just never had a ship this big and this heavy in our history.
3 tries.
3 tries.
And they got it on
the charm.
Right.
Real quick here as we go to break. While Old Ironsides is the most famous nickname, it also, the USS Constitution, was it the nation's ship, the pirate, or the pride of the Republic, or Hull's victory? Yeah. We'll answer that as well after the break. Welcome back, everybody, to the Great American Story. And every week, John and I, we brainstorm on what would be something we think that you would find interesting. And this story of the USS Constitution, the more you learn about it, the more you just appreciate this ship. And by the way, you also appreciate, John, the efforts to keep it alive and not be sold off for scrap.
For sure. We're over 200 years old, 228 years old, and it's still afloat.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you can get this trivia question here.
Okay. So what was its other nickname? The nation's ship, the pride of the Republic, or Hull's victory? I think back in those days, people would have loved to have given credit where credit was due, because it was a ship, but it was also a very wily sea captain, Captain Isaac Hull. So I'm going to go Hull's victory.
Yeah, it's actually the nation's ship.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
okay.
And that really stems from the sentiment that was built up after the War of 1812 around that ship, and the fact that it was undefeated and it was this beacon of, America. And in 2009, it was designated America's ship of state, believe it or not.
Oh, okay.
So it is officially, though less commonly referred to as a nation's ship. Now, Old Ironsides is really its famous nickname, and we should probably dig into how that name came to be. So we're in the War of 1812.
Yeah. Okay. So the ship has been around now for several years.
Correct.
We've gone all the way from when it made its debut under President John Adams, and now we're heading into the administration of James Madison.
Right.
And the tensions have grown to the boiling point between the U.S. and Great Britain, and war is on. And I'm telling you, if we didn't have these ships, we wouldn't have had much of a fighting chance. As it was, as we all know, the British burned the White House.
That's right.
For goodness sakes. But there was one bright spot in that war in terms of our ability to match them toe-to-toe, and that was this ship, and I think the others as well. But so you have a captain, Isaac Hull. He's, I think, pushing 40, late 30s, had been at sea for many, many years, and he was ready for a battle.
Sure.
And the War of 1812 had only been going on just a short period, I think just a couple of months. And he was, when they finally got this thing out there onto the open waters, he was looking for the enemy.
He was.
And he found a ship called the Guerriere, and it doesn't begin with an all-out pitched battle. We're going to get to that. But at first, I almost think he was taking it out for a trial run. This was his baby now, and he wanted to see how fast she could go.
Sure. Yeah.
And incredibly, once they came close, that we're talking about the British ship, which was called the Guerriere, which people would probably say, why is it called the Guerriere? Well, that's a French name.
Yep.
They had the strongest navy in the world. The Brits had taken that ship and made it their own, but they still kept it as the Guerriere.
Right.
Which it's funny, when you go looking for it, on a search, sometimes it'll correct you and say something like, "Look, it's not the Gary Air, like a guy named Gary."
Yes.
With the last name of Air.
One word.
Right. It's Guerriere, this French name. And, they were equally matched, I think, in terms of the firepower. But he did prove that he could outrun
That's right.
The best the British had, a 57-hour chase.
That's right. I read in Ian Toll's book here how they did that.
Okay.
And he dipped the sails. He wetted the sails.
Oh, yeah.
To help with the speed.
Okay.
They poured their drinking water overboard.
Yeah.
And because when he came up to these, there were three of them, as I understand, three English ships.
Right.
Realizing they're English, he turns around, hightails it back to Boston.
Sure. You don't like your odds when you're up against multiple ships with multiple cannons on board ready to aim at you.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Right. So, and it was a 3-day chase, like you said. A 3-day chase had been one of the longest and most desperate in the entire history of sail.
Yes.
And by saving the Constitution, Hull had averted a capture that might have dealt a devastating blow to the nation's confidence and morale at the outset of the war. Though it was not a victory, the triumphant escape against heavy odds had revealed that the Royal Navy had no inherent advantage over the Americans in the mastery of seamanship.
Yeah.
Afterward, the English officers conceded that the handling of the American frigate had been, quote, elegant.
Yeah. Well,
nice.
You know what? Sometimes escape is your best option,
It is.
as the British proved at Dunkirk,
Yeah,
right, during World War II.
Yeah.
And in this case as well. Yeah, I mean, the whole outcome of at least the battles at sea would have been, I think, entirely different if he hadn't proved to be such a cagey captain at sea, and also with this sleek and yet strong, massive ship that he could outrun. Nevertheless, John, we get back to the point, and I really think it probably gnawed on him, talking about Captain Isaac Hull,
Right.
in charge of that ship. I bet it gnawed on him every day that he had to do that. When I'm sure, he was probably saying, look, if I could get them one-on-one, give me a chance in battle. And ultimately, that is what happened.
He went back for more. That's
Yes,
right. He
right.
went back. He went back into Boston and resupplied, and then he went back out, and it was on. And this is where the name Old Ironsides became famous. But so they went to battle.
Yep.
The Guerriere and the Constitution, and there was somebody on that ship that noticed that the cannonballs, like you said before, were bouncing off of the Constitution because of her build and that live oak and that structure.
Yeah.
So the actual quote was huzzah. They said huzzah back then, not huzzah.
Oh, okay. All right. We're sticklers for pronunciation around
Her
here.
sides are made of iron.
Yes.
So hence the name Old Ironsides. She became
Right.
Old Ironsides.
Yeah.
To this day, she's known as Old Ironsides. So she destroyed the Guerriere.
Yes.
She
and it's interesting because So they took aim. By the way, I like to just kind of almost visualize what that. And by the way, this whole battle lasted less than an hour.
That's right.
About 45 minutes. And, they're sounding the drums, the drum beat of war. Battle is on. Every man to his station.
Yeah.
They had, I believe, 44 cannons.
44.
Yeah, and the Guerriere
And actually,
had
I read
few
somewhere
under 40. Yeah,
where they would up that to sometimes 56. That they would.
Oh, is that
yeah,
right?
sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Well, and they were good aim.
Sure.
I mean, you had a great captain who was getting it. In fact, from my understanding is when battle began, he did not want them firing those cannons until they were right on it.
Yeah, how close?
Right next to each other like this so that they could open fire.
Wow.
And it's like, hold. We're talking about all the way back in the earliest days of the American Republic. Don't fire, boys, till you see the whites of their eyes.
That's right.
In this case, don't open fire on that enemy ship of the greatest navy that ever sailed. Even the Americans would admit that at that time. We're going to get them, but hold. And when they finally opened fire, it was devastating. It sounds to me, John, that when the main mast of the Guerriere was knocked down, that's when the ball game was over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because then basically, it came all the way down into the water, almost acted like a rudder that you couldn't control. And at that point, I think the British probably realized the game was up.
Most definitely.
Yeah. And so the battle basically is over in less than an hour. And as you say, at some point, somebody said it, and the story was passed on.
That's right.
And then, remind yourself it's called the USS Constitution because the whole country was calling it Ironsides. But he was so anxious, Captain Hull, to, get back to shore and to tell the story. By the way, I have in my notes here somewhere that the number of prisoners that they took, because these ships were heavily loaded with men. Here we go. The British suffered 15 dead and 78 wounded in that battle. The Americans had 7 dead and several others wounded. 267 officers and men on board had surrendered to the Americans. I think he would have liked to have taken that ship all the way into shore.
Oh, no doubt.
But it was so badly damaged, he made the decision that he was going to set her on fire and sink her.
Yeah.
And so he says to this Captain Dacre, can you just tell me if there's a single item on this ship that you would like for us to save for you? You are my prisoner, but we're about to set her on fire and sink her to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. And did you hear what the captain said?
I didn't.
What he wanted saved?
No.
He said, I have sailed since the day I began sailing on this ship, I have carried my mother's Bible with me to sea. And if there's one thing I could take off that ship before you set fire to her, it would be my mom's Bible.
No kidding.
Yeah, how about that?
Wow.
Pretty sweet.
That's a great little tidbit. Wow.
So it sank. And this is one of the most amazing parts. It sank, and it's still down there to this day.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
It's out there many, many miles to the west of where the Titanic would go down exactly 100 years later. Wow. And it still sits at the bottom of the sea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
How about
well, that would not be the last ship that the Constitution would defeat.
Yes, that's right. Before you know it, we go to Brazil.
That's right. So there's 3 more. There's 3 more ships under different command, but still the Levant and the Java and the, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but the Cyan, all defeated. So the Constitution's an undefeated warship.
Yeah, and when you think about it, this is, again, a Navy with experienced sailors, talking about the British, with this vast array of armaments and ships. And I was trying to think of a sports metaphor, and it would be like if you came out onto the field and you're a rookie. I mean, you are brand new.
Yeah.
And you win 2 Super Bowls in a row, because that's who you were. It was David versus Goliath.
That's right. That's right, yeah.
And the American public felt, I think, a sense of pride in a war that otherwise was going sideways on us.
Yeah.
And thanks to the USS Constitution. Thanks first to Captain Hull. And by the way, afterwards, he was reassigned to work on shore because he had some family matters he had to attend to. And so you had a new captain, Bainbridge.
Yep.
William Bainbridge. And
Yeah.
he was the one that sailed her all the way down to Brazil, and another great victory there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and she underwent a lot of renovations over the years. We have some video here, courtesy of our friends at Movie Tone News and Fox Archives, of some renovations that went on over the years. At one point, they wanted to scrap it, but there was a lot of American sentiment to keep it around.
Thank goodness for that.
And it
I mean, they
exists
really had to
today.
mount an effort
They
to
did.
save it.
They did. And there's a lot more to that story, which we unfortunately can't get into here. But yeah,
We need to expand to an hour,
we do,
John.
yes.
The Great American Story.
Yeah.
We'll see you again next time.